Okay, we had a walk yesterday, and here comes Jackie. Let's give her a chance to get settled. Jackie, good morning.
Good morning. I'm driving. How are you?
Well, thank you.
It's good to
Gabe
be
was,
here.
thank you very much. Yeah, it's you're early today. So Gabe was just starting. We took a walk yesterday, like we do on Saturdays. You're always welcome to. I know that you've got some other commitments in the morning on Saturdays, but go ahead, Gabe.
Oh, just yesterday's walk. You mentioned substance abuse,
Mm-hmm.
and it just was coming from if everyone is an addict or not. It seemed like you were saying, a part of the human condition is addiction in a broad sense. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but so I'm just, but then you related it to substance abuse, that most people, perhaps all, don't think on the right footing, literally. So, or use thoughts to undermine their substance, and so therefore it's substance abuse. So that was interesting.
So, without putting words in my mouth, I think you said what I said, and noticing it and the interest in it is obviously sort of a thinking awareness of it, right?
Mhm.
Morning, Jenna. And let me clarify a little bit. I can suggest that everyone may be suffering from this and be wrong because there's 8.5 billion people it would take to be right in that comment. But I'd rather look at it from the point of view that any thought, what I realized and what I've learned is that any thought I'm maintaining that isn't true, that I think is true, or that is true and isn't true, that I think isn't true, I have chosen to create a conflict that is often seen as something happening to me in a condition of life rather than being caused by my choice to think that way. And in the annals, the history of addiction, it's very often the case the person suffering from it doesn't think it's the thing they're doing that is wrong that's causing the problem. They think it's the justification and the stories and the pain and the misery and the history and the trauma and all of the ideas they have about life and everything else and everyone else that has done them wrong or in some way been seen that way, that is responsible for their drinking, for their drugging, for their gambling, for whatever it is. Now, I don't know that that's true in all cases, but it's fairly common as a condition of compulsive behaviors. And if that's the case, and we have that possibility and that chance, the chances are we're all doing it to some degree with things that we conveniently make conclusions about because it's, during the day, we're making decisions all the time. And often they're half-baked decisions, which is why our expectations don't always add up to the expectations. My experience. When I think my thoughts are true, I think all that should ever happen is what I expect will happen because my thoughts are true. What else could possibly happen than what I thought would happen? And if that was in fact the case, and I believe it is, and I end up facing something I didn't expect, what I'm really facing is the consequence of the thought that I presumed to be fully baked that was really not. And within the context of your point about substance, starting to see that it's what we don't see, the positions we take, for instance, are the positions we take on the ground that we stand reveal the gravity. Say, for instance, if we're taking a position on Earth, to take that position, gravity is involved in holding us to the Earth. There's an absolute stable, I don't know if it's a state. I'd call it a state because it doesn't change. Gravity change and adjusts according to the mass and according to the distance from the mass and all those kinds of things. But in any particular position, it's always this. It's the same. It's not varying where we are because we weigh what we do and we're connected to a planet that weighs what it does, et cetera. But without getting into that whole conversation, if the substance, the thing that holds us to the ground, is beneath our feet, it's beneath us literally, it isn't something we see, but it's something we obviously know because we're relying on it without even thinking about it. And yet, if the thinking we have has no substance because it's a lie, the basis of a lie is like a fraction with no denominator. It's a zero. There's nothing there except an illusion being thought of is truth. And a lie effectively is the idea that something wrong is right or something right is wrong. And if something wrong is wrong, it's never going to be right. And if something right is right, it's never going to be wrong. So the idea of a lie is an impossibility of trying to accomplish something, which only occurs in thinking, doesn't occur in the universe. It occurs in the thinking of people who can think about their thinking. Not only people, anything, any sentient creature in the universe that can think about their thinking can cause this. Doesn't mean we have to think we're lying to be lying, because the disruptions and the disturbances and the conflicts and the anguish and the turmoil are all telling us, if we're listening accurately, that this is going on, that somewhere, somehow, with something, I've made a decision that's wrong. And my body's telling me, because it's based in nature, it's based in sanity, it's based in reality. So the real substance abuse in the mental issue is thinking thoughts with no substance are substantive. Thinking thoughtlessness is thoughtfulness. And if you look out at the world, you can see a lot of that going on. And if you look at your own activity, you'll see some of that going on too. So if we're doing it at all, we're complementing other people who are doing it, and we are a part of that all. So to that degree, we are all doing the same thing because we're part of it all. We're not, while we can feel separate and think we're separate, we're also interactive simultaneously all the time with everything that's happening. Like this moment, everything that's ever happened has led to this moment. So the culmination of all those things that are no longer happening are happening in the present by virtue of the changes that occurred to have what's happening now be what's happening now. So that's the substance of it all. If I think it's not, and I think I don't belong here, I think there's no reality. I think my thought is real. And I have to work hard to prove it. And I would suggest that's the craving. The craving is the idea that I need to prove it, 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 because I'm trying to do something that is impossible. And impossibility is not possible. It's possible to think it's possible, but impossibility wouldn't be impossible if it were possible. It would be possible. So the capacity we have to think about it in those terms is perfectly free for us to do. The actuality of that thinking is not necessarily true. So that's what we're talking about, is starting to see we have a beautiful dashboard telling us what's wrong when it's wrong. And that is typically my experience. Something I've decided is right when it's wrong. Something I've decided that's wrong when it's right. Something I have decided. I have come to that conclusion. I'm relying on it. I'm depending on it. And I am hopelessly feeling hopeless because it's a hopeless situation for me to continue thinking in those terms rather than say, oh, if the conflicts are conflicted, it must be something I'm doing to create that. And to think I need to get over it and feel better about it is how those things are maintained and managed while they're unmanageable, and there's nothing there to really maintain except a thought thinking about thought, present thought. So that's a little broader scope.
I don't know. It's it's either too easy or too complicated.
Yeah. Well, you can see the difference between seeing it clearly. Seeing it clearly, you see the principle and the life's terms are absolutely simple because they don't change. Nothing could be simpler than something that never changes. What's complicated about that? What I think about it. We don't struggle with life, we struggle with what we think about it. We don't struggle with reality, we struggle with how we think about it. We don't struggle with spirit, we struggle with how we think about it. That's the spiritual malady in essence. It's what we're thinking about it that's wrong. It's not the spirit. It's not the purity. It's not the pure consciousness. It's not the absolute nature of nature, which is our nature, by the way. I mean, Jackie, we went over that with your friend the other day, Tara. I don't, I don't think she'd ever heard what we talk about. Am I right? Jackie's driving, so we may not get much out of her. Jana,
Yes, hi, I'm here. I'm here.
when you, I think it was last week, you had that moment where you had that little pop.
Yeah.
Describe what that sensory experience was.
Okay. It was just like a little awakening. It was an awareness that I would never have had before, or that I haven't had before, that just made me aware and connected to what we were talking about.
But it sort of an intimacy,
Yes.
you know, and not a sense of disconnection, a disturbance, or any of that. Just like a
Yeah, it was an aha, but it was definitely not a disconnect. It was more of a connect. It was great. I was like,
yeah,
whoa. Yeah, it was
yeah.
very
So
cool.
there's a cohesiveness to that that's almost beyond expectation. It's almost something you can't predict, because if you were predicting it, it would live up to the limited prediction, when in fact, when it occurs, it's just like, whoa, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so that I will suggest to anyone listening and you guys here, that's our normal state. It's happening all the time. We're always aware, and we're aware that we're aware. And we've been so addicted to the thinking process that we think we need to think that we're aware to be aware, which is a fatal error in the process of thinking. Because in the process of knowing, there's no process. Knowing about knowing in an absolute sense isn't a process, it's an absolute state, meaning it's not a process, it's not analytical, it's not comparative. It's just a state of being that's present always. That's the root of existence. Pure consciousness. It would be impure if it came and went. It would be impure if it changed when I thought it changed, or when my thinking changed. So to see that is to begin to witness in thinking the profound nature of thinking's capacity to express that essence. And that's effectively what we're here to do in the discussion. You know, how far are we willing to go in a discussion? We don't have to believe in the things we consider, and we don't have to agree with them, and we don't have to have hope in them. We don't have to have faith in them to talk about them, and start to consider that if those things are possible, they would be possible right now. And certainly if we can't talk about them, there's a slim chance we're going to do much about them in any effective manner, because our words are coming from our thinking. If our thinking is bound, we're going to think our tongue is bound and tied. It isn't, but we can think it is. So the real substance abuse is a thoughtless thought to be substantive. What would a thoughtless thought be? Something that has no basis in anything other than my thinking about my thinking. It isn't reality. It's just a fantasy I'm creating, an illusion I've developed, I've maintained, I've picked up, I'm maintaining presently that I think is true and real. It's what I think is substantive, because I think thinking is reality. I think my life is who I think I am. I think my ego is some individual that acts upon me and has me do things that I would otherwise never do, as though it has a life of its own, which is how I've created it, because I'm thinking about thinking as I think about it, as reality, as life, as truth. Thinking is something we do. It can't be who we are any more than I can actually become a driver simply because I drive a car. I can drive a car. It doesn't make me a driver. It doesn't say, that's it. Your entire essence is now a driver. Something we do. Thinking is something we do. Something we have. And not something we have to do in terms of the choices we make. The choices we make are freely chosen. So we want what we have, and we have what we want. We get what we want when we think what we do and act on it. We may not think we want that because we may think the thought is better than it is because we've gotten so used to trying to manipulate our experience rather than witness it accurately and not be hamstrung by all the inner conflict and the emotional turmoil and the mental anguish that comes from thinking that we're the masters of the universe trying to manipulate our experience and manipulate reality. When in fact, all we're doing is manipulating the misery and struggle and internal strife that we think is caused by something other than what we're doing. And addiction is typically that, flipped around. Everything, if a lie is trying to be only what it can't be, it's an attempt to reverse the natural order of life. Can't happen because an absolute source that doesn't change, the opposite of it would be the exact same thing. And backward would be the exact same. Whatever it is wouldn't go backward and forward because it isn't even operating in space and time. It's completely beyond that dimension that we think is reality, that we talk about as reality. It's not reality. It's a possibility of reality. It's an experience for life forms to experience. So, Janet, my sense is that was a moment of clarity.
Yep.
That you didn't plan on, you didn't think about, because intuition is just knowing you know. And when you see that, it's pretty profound because it's actually revealing. It's kind of like we say the sun's not out when the clouds are out, but the sun's actually out. And we think when it finally comes through the clouds, now the sun's out. Well, it's been out the whole time. The cloudy nature, the foggy notions we have do not block the light of the spirit or the absolute pure white light of whatever that essence is. And yet we can think it does, and we can think we do. It's pure possibility of our thinking. And when we do, it's so insane. The only way for us to make sense of insanity is to pretend we have nothing to do with it and see an insane world and insane people and people who are toxic and everything else other than our own activity. I hate that. Any thoughts? I happen to have a couple.
Yay.
So in the first step in AA, for anyone listening, this is not a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is just people who have had experience with the 12 steps and have put them to use to overcome different compulsions. So we act anonymously here so that we don't violate the tradition of anonymity, which is not, by the way, about hiding what we're doing. Anonymity is often thought to be only about the stigma of a problem that you don't want people to see you attached to or don't want them to know. But the essence of anonymity, again, is this absolute nature that's personaless, characterless, bodiless, faceless, formless. It's an essence that's essential. It isn't an option. And that's ultimately what anonymity is in its principled basis. So think of that. You can't be apart from something that's absolute. We can't be divided. We can think we are, and we can act in divisive ways. That doesn't make reality change. It doesn't make reality anything. What it makes is an experience that's difficult to endure. So within the context of the first step, for instance, which I want to work through the steps and sort of apply this to something that a lot of people out there have had experience with. Millions of people out there have had experience with. And I want to apply it to the thinking. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things I was doing this week. So the disease of alcoholism, the disease of addiction, is talked about as a body, mind, and spirit problem. I'm going to get some notes so I don't miss any of this. What's interesting is we talk about the mind, body, physical manifestation, body, mind, and will. Now think about this. The mind, in terms of the brain, is in the body. So the mind we're referring to in this is the brain. This is the problem. Body, will, and mind. So it's all physical at this point. The brain is, in fact, what we're calling the mind. I would say the brain isn't the mind. The brain is a product, a possibility of that mind. That mind is invisible to us. And yet it's ever present. And it's all knowing. So it isn't thinking. So the thing we're talking about in the problem is the body and the brain, because the brain is in the body, and the will, unmanageability, malady, the body, allergy, craving. The craving of the brain is the thought, let's say just alcohol. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says, we all seem to have the thought that we can control and enjoy our drinking, and that we can drink like normal people, people that don't have the allergy to sugar. And an allergy is an abnormal reaction, abnormal response, which is a reaction, knee-jerk, automatic, not considered, simply acted on, impulsively, compulsively. Starting with reactivity. Reactivity is very different than responsibility, which is considered, pause, restraint, contemplate, think. What am I doing? What am I about to do? So if the brain is the mind we're referring to, and the will, my estimation, the will are the choices we make within the thinking. If I think thinking is reality, then what we call self-will is the only thing I think I can do. So I have to will myself into reality. I have to create a reality I think I belong in, while at the same time I am claiming not to be a part of actual reality that doesn't have anything to do with my thinking. So the allergy within the physical context, is, as it's been discussed, creates a craving. The craving seems to last as long as I continue to do the thing that I am addicted to. Why? Because it asks for more, it asks for more, it asks for more, it asks for more. Why? Because it's not solving the problem. It's not addressing the problem, it's addressing the symptom, the effect. So what's the cause? My thought. I can control and enjoy this. And the craving in the mental aspect is the attempt to prove I'm right over and over and over and over again, trying to think the thing I think is true, or I wouldn't be relying on it. And I need to think more about it to finally get it to the place I need to get, always trying to get to some place with more or less of something else that I don't have now. That's a denial of the ever-present state of this absolute knowingness, this absolute beingness, this absolute consciousness. And if it's absolute, we can't have any more than that. We can't have any less than that, because it isn't functioning within a relative give and take, more or less potential for conflict in thinking. There is no conflict in that. So what are the steps said to be? Principles. What are principles? They don't move, they don't change. They're life's terms. And if I think life's terms are flexible because I don't apply them properly, I'm missing the fact that it's my own application of those terms that I'm failing at, that I'm defective in the thinking of, which is another aspect of what the steps are looking for. Where's the character defects? What am I doing that's faulty? Where am I responsible? And in step 4, effectively, I'm responsible for it all of it. Fourth column, there's no excuse left because I get to see that I am at the center of that decision-making process, those choices, and all of the ideas I have that come subsequent to that. The unmanageability is that I'm basically trying to imagine that I can manage something that doesn't exist, that has no basis. So I keep thinking about it more and think that more thinking is going to solve it. And there's the obsessive thinking over and over and over and over and over again, chronically fixated on a very narrow point, trying to make it right while ignoring all the other points that are included in what is right, all the other possibilities, all the other options, all the other variations. So in fact, if I have the freedom to make any point, in that freedom and in that expression of freedom, I am confirming that everyone else and everything else has the right to make any point they want to. But within the confines of the addiction, I think anyone else thinking anything other than I do becomes highly suspect and a great threat. So what do I become? Very concerned about what other people think of me, because I think I'm what I think. Now I'm concerned about their thinking as being weaponized. I've weaponized it by making believe that their thinking now actually threatens my life, because the life I believe I'm leading is limited to the thinking I think I'm doing in the way that I'm doing it. So thinking isn't the problem. It's what and how I think that's the problem. If what I think about, if how I think about what I think about is that it's reality, there's nothing I can think about that will be right about that. Because reality is not, if it's infinite, it does not have any limits or any shortages or any defective natures whatsoever. It's pure possibility. And that pureness includes the possibility that we think impossible. Just to show how free and benevolent that source is, we're free to think that impossibility is possible and that possibility is impossible. That understanding is misunderstanding and perception is misperception, and think all those things are natural. We've reversed the entire conversation throughout human history to reflect a conversation that supports the contention that all we are is what we think. And we got to get it right, constantly looking to get it right, constantly seeking for the thing that cannot be lost. Humans have been looking for a long time and seem to need more solutions and answers today than ever. And with the access of the internet and social media and all that, there's a lot of ideas floating around there that are creating a lot of other ideas and a lot of other ideas and a lot of other ideas that do not seem to be settling people's question whatsoever. If you try to divide one in half, you never get to zero, never get free of the process of trying to get there. The fraction just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger behind the decimal point. While it seems to be getting smaller, the number is getting bigger. And interestingly enough, when those numbers don't come to an end, like a whole number divided by 2 divided by 4, or 4 divided by 2 is 2. That's a whole number. We call those numbers that go on forever irrational numbers, and miss the point that we're doing it in our thinking and think we're not irrational. Trying to divide and conquer, trying to split the atom once more, split the personality again. Somehow we're going to split it into pieces that are finally going to add up someday. Not going to happen. And we know it. We're aware of it. We feel it. We feel the loathing. We feel the emptiness. We feel the lack of value, seeming value. Because it isn't there. I was reading something this week about a doctor talking about obsessive thinking, and he said somewhat what we talked about, but I'm going to go a little further than what he said. He said one way to help stop obsessive thoughts is to agree with them. And it sort of makes the point that we're disagreeing with them and fighting them, thinking we're going to get them right someday. But the problem with agreeing with them, if we think it's just a tool to get over them, is to miss the fact that agreeing with them is start to notice that they are actual reflections, accurate reflections of what we're thinking, not who we are. If an obsessive thought is trying to get over feeling loathsome feelings, and we're feeling the consequences of trying to turn our thinking into ourself and think that who we are is what we think, that is a loathsome activity. Self-induced. It's inducing a self we think is who we are. It isn't. So back to your point, Gabe, about the substance and starting to notice this. We notice it. We say we don't know because we don't want to give credit where credit is due, and we want to take credit where it's undue because we're backward in the thinking. If in fact I'm thinking this and I'm feeling the effect, and rather than look for the cause, start noticing the effect is telling me the cause, again, we're going to go backward. We're actually going to look accurately at what we're doing. So if I look at the effect, I'm starting to identify the cause. And when I see the cause is what I'm thinking that's wrong, feeling wrong is a naturally accurate assessment of that thinking. And the conflict with maintaining that obsessive thought, trying to fix it, stops because there's nothing now broken in that assessment. Nothing. We've concluded that the thinking that we're wrong, for instance, or loathsome, is actually reflecting wrong, loathsome thoughts. And to think that they're real is to create present traumatic stress that will not go away and will not be relieved as long as we maintain those thoughts. And that anxiety and pressure in our bodies undermines, creates inflammation, creates all sorts of stress, and undermines our physical capacity to continue to function properly. Not only are dysfunctional functions the things we're trying to do constantly that seem to be failing, we constantly trying to be getting there, we constantly need to think we need to marshal all of our resources and be more confident and be more ambitious and all that. None of that's necessary in an intuitive, knowing, present state of mind. None of it, because everything is already possible. It isn't something we need to make, we need to do to prove it's possible. It's already possible. To live on that as the substance of our thinking is to allow the thinking to be able to express those possibilities. Think of the serenity step. Grant me the serenity to, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. What would one of those things be but the absolute nature of God's existence? So I've always had the serenity while I'm thinking it's God that either gives or takes it from me. Again, thinking of God in human terms rather than thinking us in God's terms, which are absolute. It's just a word for an absolute, pure, infinite consciousness. And what's the second half of that? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can. When I'm no longer discouraged in the thinking by thinking things that aren't true are true and thinking things that are true aren't true, what could be great? What greater discouragement could there? I think I need to develop courage to overcome this impossibility of discouragement that I'm basically living in the midst of, thinking my job is to overcome it, rather than simply undo it and let it go and see that it's nothing more than a thought I'm hanging on to right now. And if it's delusional, I'm hanging on to nothing other than the thought I'm hanging on to something. And talk about simple, Gabe, that's very simple. But the clarification of the complication of our thinking becomes more obvious when you start looking at this accurately. And the depth of the activity and the length of time we've done it becomes very, very disturbing to see it clearly. Because it's sick. I got nauseous. I threw up. literally all that buildup, that bile and all that stuff that was just basically discharged that wasn't, it was charged that was undischarged in my body. And there is still some left. For sure. So honesty, which is repeated several times in the beginning of how it works, the only thing that's repeated that many times, if 3 or 4, isn't about telling the truth. It's about accurately assessing what's happening right now. That's honesty. I don't need to be right, to be honest. And that's a relief compared to thinking I have to say it in a way that proposes I know well enough not to be doing what I'm doing. So here's how I see it in some new rationalized, justified way. There's no justification or rationalization in anything other than lying. None needed. We're trying to make up a story to go with the failing that we're not admitting we're causing. If we start with the cause, we're not going to rationalize any effect because the effect will start to straighten out naturally. Just like you witnessed that experience, Jana, the action starts happening before we even think about it. And the clarity of that knowing becomes more obvious the more we practice and apply it.
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. I was gone for a week. I was on the west side at a hotel with real people and everything. So now I'm back to like paradise behind the gate. It's kind of trippy.
Well, welcome home.
Thank you. I just drove over to Lahaina, but it was still interesting. Lots of people. It was good to see how like I would feel, around all that activity, and it was lovely. It was fine.
Good.
Yeah.
If freedom is the nature of our existence, the idea that we're experiencing anything but that tracks back to how we're thinking about what's happening. It's not imposed on us, it's imposed by the thinking we're doing. And keep in mind, we think about it as us. I'm doing it. What I'm doing is the thinking. What I'm choosing is the thinking. The rest of it is a natural manifestation of mistaken thoughts. Literally, I've taken them for reality and they are not. Basically, that's the root of forgiveness and a lack of forgiveness. If I'm for taking things as I think they are, I forget I have anything to do with those things because it would be insane to admit that I did. And that bridge is simply the awareness of saying, oh, I'm doing that. I am choosing that. If I am doing it, I am not the doing of it. I'm the chooser of that doing. That means I can change it. If everything in the universe, as far as this physical experience we're having changes, everything's already changing. Why would I think I can't change something? It's already changing all the time. I think it's the same because I'm reinforcing the idea that it isn't different, that it's the same. It's the same old thing. I keep doing this. I keep doing this. I keep doing this, and not noticing I'm making the choice to continue, to start it, not the consequence of not being able to stop it. I'm the one starting it. I am the one starting it over and over and over and over again, insisting as though it's the only thing I can do. Why would we use choice as an excuse if choice always allows not to be chosen? And if it weren't a choice, it wouldn't be a choice. Why would we say I have no other choice? It's just another sick excuse to take something that's principled and pretend it's not. Because the seeming luxury of that thinking is to begin to infect everything we touch with the same disconnected thinking process. The toxicity starts in our own mentality. Each of ours individually and all of ours collectively. So to that point, Gabe, there's the substance. It's something, if we have the potential of doing it and it's happening, then we're all doing it to the degree it's happening with anyone, anywhere, all the time. We're part of it all seamlessly and absolutely inextricably unable to separate ourselves other than by appearance, then the influence we have must not be very great to have this go on in other sectors and think of it as something we can do nothing about and we have nothing to do with. It's the same thinking that starts in my own thinking, that I have nothing to do with what I'm doing. I'm irresponsible for what I'm doing, is what I'm saying. I don't exist, so it can't possibly be me. Second thought is, there's nothing else I can do. If I don't have anything to do with it, I can't do anything about it. Third thought is, I might as well just continue doing the same old thing. And yet it's new, with every new moment being looked at as old. Once again, everything's flipped backward. Tell me about your travel schedules this month, kids.
Just gone.
Are you around?
I'm
You
gone
around
for
on
the
Sundays?
weekend. I'm gone for the weekend of the 20th or 22nd, something like that. But
From 22 to 29?
no, I'm here the rest of the week. I think it's just, let me look at the dates here. It's just the 20th through the 22nd I won't be around. So I will miss this 22nd Zoom group.
Right.
If there is one. Aren't you going somewhere?
I may take a week off because I may be out of pocket. I don't know where I'm going exactly, but give everybody a break from my cacophony. Jackie, you staying, going? Jana?
I'm going to be here. I would love to have a
Okay.
meeting if you're free.
Okay. How's your friend doing, by the way?
She's good. I really haven't talked to her. I don't get to talk to her all that much. I'm going to see her on the 15th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jana, you're in Maui the whole time?
Jana went back to the other side.
She's having another moment of clarity.
Yeah.
Pure
Oh,
silence.
I have a question for you.
Please.
I've been saying when I have a thought that isn't serving me,
Mm-hmm.
I am having this feeling because I think that I have to. It's a choice,
You think
I think
you
that
think
I have
that
a
I have to,
yeah. I have a
that you
belief.
have to.
I have a belief system in me that thinks I have to worry or something,
Right.
and that's been helping me.
So if you have that belief system, is it believable? Or is it just based on belief and unbelievable?
Well, it's interesting because I'm like, oh, I'm making this.
Yeah.
It helps me really be like, yeah, I believe that I have to worry, so I'm worrying.
Right. Well, if you're believing in impossible things, there's no amount of belief. I mean, I think this is one of the topics that within the context of addiction, people often feel they don't have enough faith. They don't have enough hope. But they're thinking about faithless and hopeless things. They're thinking about unbelievable things and thinking that enough belief will turn them into something that's not only believable, but real. Because
Right.
we even say when we see something, that's unbelievable. It's actually happened in front of our eyes and we say that's unbelievable. That's kind of interesting how we've sort of morphed that word into something that's it's questionable when we see it happen. And yet while it's not happening, it seems to be the thing we rely on.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
this guy shooting the insurance guy is pretty unbelievable, but it's believable because it's happening. It happens.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that whole situation?
Well, it's certainly intriguing that somebody goes to that extent and then is able to disappear so quickly, or seem to.
Right.
It's not going to come to a good end for that guy, regardless of what happens, because the whole act is obviously he was unhappy with the guy for what he's doing, and certainly there's been enough unhappiness in that whole sector. But if you see those industries as industries often driven for the benefit of individuals that aren't benefiting the individuals they're serving. And I think you were starting with, is it serving me? You
Right.
mentioned, you look
Right.
at, so here's the question. Who's the me in that question? Is it serving yourself, that self you think you are? And I would say that if it is, it's just another justification to think there's a self to serve.
Right.
Because ultimately, an infinite source is already serving you in every way,
In every way.
without any hesitation, without any reluctance, without any condition. You can be bad and you can hate it, and it will continue to do exactly what it's doing.
And
This is not.
if I think something's hard, the universe is going to be like, okay. And if I think something's going to be easier, the universe is like, okay.
It probably doesn't even say words. It just is.
Right. Right.
If it's unchanging, it's probably the silence of it is the lack of language is an analytical process that we developed as humans that is obviously something we were designed to do for the functional capacity of communication. Same as feelings. That's another form of communication. Our sentient nature is really aware of everything that's going on because this moment is everything that's going on. And to think in those terms starts to dispel a lot of the little rumors about the little thinking we're doing is ever going to add up to anything that would account for that. It would always, as Gabe said earlier, it's either simple or complicated. So the question is, do I see it accurately, or do I begin to think about it as only what I think? So where's the freedom in all this? How do we get there? Well, we're there. It's the thinking we're doing now that suggests we're not there, because the thinking, if the thinking has no there, like Gertrude Stein said, if the thinking has no there because it has no place, it literally doesn't have any place because it doesn't exist. It's literally fantasy. All it is fantasy. If it's fantasy is fantasy, that's not a conflict. If I simply admit I'm having wishful thoughts, I just wish. Why would I wish if I already had? Why would I bother? Because I think I don't have. And my sense is those are all death wishes, because we're really crippling our own capacity to function at a level of abundance that we're designed to do. So we get into these corrupt little sectors and try to eke out something more for us individually. And what we're doing is taking from everyone else in that sector. And that's what many industries do. Supposed to provide something, and they do everything they can not to provide that thing. Give as little as possible, take as much as possible. That's all that toxic idea. It's the same thing as thinking that a little thought could become reality simply because I think it is. Meaning, all reality now has to disappear for that to ever be true. So you can see how the corrupt nature sort of, there's a line in the big book that says we suffer from a lack of proportion. Everything becomes nothing and nothing becomes everything. It's just a thought.
Nothing becomes everything. It's a good song.
Imagine.
What about, sorry to go back to this, but do you think it's possible, I'm really going off subject, that if that guy gets caught, a jury of his peers might think that, like, if we find out that his mother couldn't get the help that she needed, and the jury of his peers might let him off in some way.
Well, we've seen that happen.
Where have we seen that happen? Oh,
OJ.
right, but that's right.
I mean, there's been sympathies that have allowed people to skate through with, either they were guilty enough to be guilty, but were let off for, there's a lot of legal issues too.
But OJ was self-serving in what he did. He got off because of retribution, but this guy really did something for the benefit of humanity.
Well, I would say that that is probably a bad example of thinking you're doing something for the benefit of humanity.
Well, I think I don't think murder is benefiting humanity, but I think his intention was that it does, that it would.
Yeah. I mean, that's right there is war. That's how we all justify war and think it's normal, but when in fact it's not. Think it's
Right.
natural when in fact it's not. All those, it's interesting. We think that by extinguishing a life, somehow we save life. And in certain cases, it looks like that if you do the math. Like
Right.
Hitler and everyone else probably would have been better off if he'd shot himself when he didn't get into art school.
Right. Exactly.
But it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be some other diabolical process that
Right.
manifests as a result of the kind of thinking that we're all doing and participating in. We are the society. We are the social ill that's thinking ill of society in general by making believe nobody's ever going to listen to this. Nobody's ever going to do this. And so what do? Commit to maintaining it as it is. And how it
Right.
is not healthy.
I completely want world peace, 100%. Like that's the dream. I don't condone this murder. It is at the same time, there's a truth to that only good in our history, it's been mostly good guys that were murdered. John Lennon, Martin Luther King, the Kennedys, and
Yeah.
this is the first time really that it's the other way around, and it's still not right in any way, but it's a change in a better direction. I don't know what it's
Well,
there's a refreshingness to it. It's people like him might think twice about doing screwing millions of people.
that's exactly what the basis of terrorism and extremism is in the world.
Yeah.
And
It's that
sounds
exact same thing.
like you were loopholing to me.
What,
Well,
Jenna?
It sounded like a loophole to me. Like it wasn't 100% that it's not okay to kill. Like that it sounded like a loophole that it was okay.
I don't think it's okay to kill. I just think I never ever think it's okay to kill, because I think what you do comes back to you, and it's just going to harm him. And I never think it's okay to take a life. But at the same time, there is a truth to that it's not, for once, it's not the it's not a great person. It's a holding accountable in a way.
But think about society operating on the basis of waiting for one person to do something so drastic to get our attention to speak up to something that is so fucking obvious.
Right. That's what
Think
I mean.
of how
it's so obvious that this guy was a horrible person.
I don't know anything about him. What I'm talking about is
right. But he was hurting
I'm not,
millions of people. The whole system's hurting millions of people.
so too is the idea that there's nothing we can do about what we're thinking about today. That's where it comes from. We allow this to happen by making believe these things we think are so elucidated, so enlightened. Nobody's ever going to do this. And so you and I participate in dumbing down and stupefying society. So the ills become so sick because we allow people to seemingly get away with, they're not getting away with anything. Everybody knows it's wrong. Whatever they're doing, if it's wrong, people know it's wrong. We don't talk about it openly, so they don't notice that there's a public out there that is not interested in playing that game anymore. And we all
I
go
believe
along with it.
everything comes back to, so you don't have to punish that guy because everything
Doesn't
he
have
does,
to come back. It never leaves.
right.
It doesn't go anywhere to come back. It literally, the immediacy of whatever we do is immediate. This idea of karma being the only, think about karma and how we've developed that. Now, I don't know, it may be accurate. I think it's another mythology. But why would it be that I'm now living a life that is a result of a past life that I can't do anything about. How convenient.
I
And
believe
that
that what you put out in the world, you get back.
I got it. Right
Yeah.
now, immediately.
Right.
Cause and
Immediately, though.
effect are
Yeah.
immediate.
I like
Cause and
that.
effect are immediate. Karma is immediate.
Right.
Interesting that we would think of it as something that happened. I'm here now this way because of something happened in another life. There's nothing I can do about it. Think of how closely that relates to this addictive thinking. So all I can do this life is try to be better because I'm basically condemned by things I can't control. Why? So I get a better life next time. What am I being induced by? Not the absolute nature of what's right now, but the absolute nature of what I may not have to suffer later. Why? Because of what I didn't do last lifetime or what I did do last lifetime. It's sort of this whole quandary of time and space. And we may have manifested this specifically to help mirror this kind of thinking, that the cause and effect isn't. My sense is cause precedes effect, but effect is immediate to cause, immediate, simultaneous.
Mm.
And yet it's not an effect if we don't cause it. So it gives us a start point, a present point. Because if the essence of a living absolute life force that isn't even a force, because it doesn't need to be force, it's just an essence, a presence. If that's here now, that is the cause of existence. So what's the effect? All these possibilities that we're witnessing, we're one of them, as a form of life, like the plants and the animals and the mountains, and all of it is a product of that. So we're actually symptoms, effectively, of that cause. If,
Right.
in fact, we don't see, but a pure cause can't have an effect. Those are things we're choosing, and that's the difference in our experience. We have bodies, they have brains, we think with those bodies. We're the commander and chief of that thinker that we have, that brain. We make the decisions. We're sitting in the cockpit. We have the dashboard. It's all our feelings and all of our responses and our reactions and all that stuff that's going on is all of our dashboard, telling us how well we're doing, how well we're being, well-being in relation to our choices. And our choice to deny what we're doing and think it shouldn't be happening while it's happening is a very curious idea. Just like we see something and say, "Oh, that's unbelievable." Well, that's unbelievable. You just saw it. What does belief have to do with it now? You witnessed it. But it certainly shows how limited we think things are. And then when somebody goes beyond those things we think are limited, we think it's unbelievable because it shows how limited belief is and faith is and hope is. Hoping and hopeless things is a vain attempt to have those things come true. And it all tracks back to the idea that the ultimate disease is a lie in a brain that is an insane. Our bodies can't process sugar. That's the effective allergy of alcoholism, but our brains cannot process insanity. They're not designed for that. They're based in reality. So what do they give us? Accurate feedback. That's our feelings. I feel wrong. I'm having a wrong thought. If I assign it to the thinking I'm doing, I'm no longer in a quandary in the world as to why I feel so alone. I create the feeling of being alone by having thoughts I think are real enough to think I can't do anything about when I'm the one making them up. Like putting on a mask and all of a sudden all you are is that mask and you can't do anything. You can't take it off. It's crazy. If we can make it up, we can unmake it. And as a matter of fact, it's easier to unmake it than the making up that we do because it tends to last so long and cost so much in terms of our own capacity because it's miserable typically. The process of maintaining those things just creates misery all the time and a depressed state of mind and body. Mind being the brain when it comes to the body, not the actual capital mind. So these little explosions in life, like the murders and violence, are all, my experience, those are obsessive thoughts on steroids, getting to the point where you think it's exactly what suicide is too. The best thing you can do is just kill the body. That's all we're left to do. We have no greater potential as a species than just kill people for what they think and how they act. It's very curious. If we can't address the wrong we're doing, we're going to act as though the wrong in the world is nothing we can do about too. And so as a population of people, we've got hundreds of millions of people in this country that sit quietly with grievances and don't talk openly within their own context, within their own circles about what's actually going on for them. That disempowers the population. And we outnumber, like I heard a scientist say, that insects not only outnumber us, they outweigh us. When they make a decision to do something, we're not going to stop them. Collectively, as a society, as we get healthy, these things won't happen because we won't be the premise for that happening to occur. We're allowing it by our own disavowal of our abilities and our capacity to confront things by simply admitting what they are and start to concede that in our own experience. Then we can start talking more vocally about things out there that I don't know if you noticed, but every time there's any major transition in society, it's always a fight, always a fight. It's the new fight for this, the new fight for that. None of them have won. If we continue to do it, clearly they're not winning. The strategy isn't about fighting, it's about noticing the natural cohesion that we already have that is incredibly wise. Intuition is literally the wisdom of inspiration. It's a knowing, absolute knowing that aligns with life, that promotes life, that is the provider of life in terms of whether it's evolution or creation, whatever it is. And to think any less of that is to make believe our lesser thinking is in fact real and true. And as a result, everything we see through that lens, the looking glass, the optical nerve per se, that's all upside down and backward, like we see ourselves, our bodies in a mirror, is reality. And the only thing that's out there. It's not true. It's what's out there are beings, people who have absolute resource beyond their imagination. And to think all they are is their imagination is once again to show how quickly fantasy seems to be reality. It isn't, it won't be. And it's mentally unhealthy to imagine it will be and should be or could be. And we want everybody talks about wanting their dreams. That's interesting. My dream, I'm asleep. You know, why would I want to be unconscious to have more dreams if the reality itself is actually full and complete? I saw something on a billboard at that Deuce Machina on Lincoln at Venice Boulevard. And it said, live in the dream, try facing reality. We think of dreams like that unbelievable thing, as though we're trying to escape into them. But I guarantee most of my dreams are not always that fun. They're not always that happy. Many of them. There's terror in there. There's something in there that I'm getting, that I'm expressing that I don't seem willing to do during the day while I seem to be awake. And must obviously not be awake to have that stuff have to be processed when I'm sleeping. When my volition to control it is a little bit off guard.
It's so quiet without Anthony.
Silence speaks. So collectively, if we engage in this conversation, and I know that the quiet is often consideration and contemplation and starting to, if we singularly make believe all we're thinking is all there is, we spend a lot of time acting disconnected from everyone else and probably not talking about the things that we're thinking about, which is not a very good social skill. Because again, it keeps us, we get better at a conversation we're having with a self that doesn't exist, and yet struggle with the people that are around us that have thoughts that we could share and share our own and start to actually apply these conversations and help people notice if they don't. I suspect they know it, but it doesn't mean they think they know it or they think they do. That we all have a shared essence that isn't an option and it isn't varied and it's not based on race or sex or gender or any of those things. It's just the essence of life. It's in everything that's anything. And it's in all the nothingness between the everything that provides the space for all of that everything to even have any place whatsoever. It's in it all. It is it all. It's in it and without it. Within and without, simultaneously. Here and there and everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It's something that isn't operating in space and time. So it functioning, talking about it in word terms is going to be defining it in terms that are limited. And if it's incomprehensible, that becomes the root of actual understanding, because that same substance you were talking about, Gabe.
Yeah.
Is in fact understanding. It's the root of the ability of thinking to provide rational consequences, reasonable consequences, logical outcomes, rather than irrational, unreasonable, and illogical outcomes as the only outcome. Meaning we think it's reasonable, we think it's rational, we think it's logical, we think it's honest. That's where all this toxic activity is coming from, Jackie. It's all being acted on as though we finally conquered. We finally have enough to say we conquered the world. We didn't. We're actually abusing the process by making believe the world is scarce, so much so that we need more and more and more to prove we have enough. There's no proof in reality whatsoever. This idea that craving in the mental sense is proof does not exist in an absolute state of being. There's no proof, because what would be the proof? There is no doubt in it. The doubt is coming from thought, the analytical process of thought, the comparative capacity of thought. That's where it's coming from. Imperfection, if everything were noticed to be as it is, which it is, and noticed that way, it would all seem perfect. Everything that's happening. But to think of it distinctly and separate, once you start comparing things, we create the imperfections. If something is completely destroyed, to compare it to itself, the thing it is, would be a perfect replication of that thing. And in physics, Gabe, you can correct me here, but physics says you can't have the same thing in the same space at the same time. So what happens when you actually notice that everything as it is everything as it is? It vanishes in terms of the weight it could potentially otherwise seem to have. Literally vanishes. There's nothing there. That's the essence of the freedom. In the same moment we can think it matters, it doesn't matter. And to think that our matter of it and the significance we give it is my job to prove to everyone else is just picking a fight with impossibility. And we're never going to win that fight. We've been operating on a basis that's untrue for as long as recorded written history, which is evidenced by the viciousness and the violence that people have unleashed on each other, thinking that that's what we need to do and the only thing we need to do, because we've been treating symptoms and defects throughout history and tried to fix them rather than notice the absolute cause that's starting it all. I don't think that's grandiose to consider. I would think it's grandiose not to consider that.
How does that relate quickly, Jack, to the quantum mechanics issue of you don't know the answer until you look? You don't know the state of and location of an electron until you look. Like you were saying, two things can't occupy the same space, but you were also saying, like,
there's nothing there.
Yeah, there's nothing there, and you don't know
Yeah.
nothing's there until you look for something to be there, and then
Yeah, well, think about that in the way that we look for a problem.
Schrodinger's cat. No.
Think of the way that we look for the problem to solve, presuming there's a problem to solve.
Yeah.
So we're Chuck Chamberlain in A New Pair of Glasses said we are looking with what we are looking for. Again, creating this simultaneous nature of it's a choice we're making. And the choice I make reflects the thinking that comes with it. If I think my thoughts are real, I am simultaneously thinking reality is no longer real. So my sense is that thing we witness in space. I think Einstein said that when we look at something, it changes.
Mm-hmm.
And my sense is what's changing is the energy that we're imposing on it by seeing it as we think it is actually morphing it the same way that our own experience gets morphed. We feel heavy, we feel the weight of the world, we feel the shadows of doubt, we feel all of these things in our experience, but they are coming from the observational function of thinking, not the observational function of absolute knowing. The absolute knowing, looking at something, would know what it is and let it be that, because it wouldn't be interested in trying to figure out what it is. It would concede it already knows what it is. I don't need to think about it at all for it to know that. I'm not going to change it. And if I change it, I'm going to make a dent in it in some way. It's not going to help it. It's just going to morph it in some, or misform it in some way, misshape it. I think the gurus and the meditators, the monks talk about that state where you're really not making anything out of anything because you're allowing everything to be as it is, and there's nothing thinking needs to do about that. And they're talking about getting to the point where real freedom of choice becomes choosing what one wants and seeing the effects of those ripples from that choice. If what we choose is for everything to be what it is, I don't need to think about it that much. And my sense is we've been missing the information that stuff out there would freely give us because it is fully informed by making believe it's something we don't know and making believe it's something we don't understand. And so we act at it and look at it like it's a mystery, and it isn't a mystery because it's doing exactly what it's designed to do in exactly the way it's designed to do it. If we were receptive and saw that as a form of communication equally to the observation and decisions we make, that would complete the cycle of communication. So there's a wholeness and an integrity to it that is integrated because it isn't a bifurcation and a division and the idea that somehow or another I can put the pieces back together once I take them all apart. I mean, I know from my own experience, I used to take all kinds of stuff apart when I was a kid to figure out how it worked. And I always ended up with at least one screw left over when I got it put back together. One loose screw, I might add.
You're screwed, Jeff.
Exactly. So, my sense is, Gabe, we're speaking in terms of making believe it's our decisions and choices that are actually changing reality and making up reality, when in fact that means we're not listening to reality at all. We haven't really communed in a way that would be meaningful enough for all of those things we think. I don't think there's any mystery and there's any secrets in the universe. Everything that's happening right now is happening exactly as it's happening right now, always has been, always will be, because now is the only time anything ever happens. That present state is always present. What I think about it just makes a dent in my experience and seemingly everyone else's, because there's sort of a morose tendency of making believe we should always feel better. Seems to be nobody comes to me and says, help me feel worse. Help me think more negative thoughts. I'm looking for my true self. How could the true self be lost if we're actually looking for it? Honestly, we would stop looking. There's exactly that point, Kate. If we were simply observing, we would see that we know that thing, and we do not need to know the makeup of that thing to know that thing in every respect and commune with that thing wholly. And if we wanted to utilize it, I guarantee you it would share the information accurately, just like anyone who thinks accurately about nature is able to actually perform on the basis of that understanding once they get it clear. We think it's a process of elimination, like Descartes talked about the scientific method of constantly trying until it finally works. If we were functioning on an intuitive level, we would know exactly how it works immediately, because nothing is being withheld from us whatsoever except our own withholds in terms of the process that we make believe is the one happening, rather than the actual process that's in fact happening all the time, changing all the time. So this can sound complicated to ideas that seem real and thoughts that seem to be based in reality. But if it does, the witness of actually noticing the complication is starting to see the thinking the one is doing who feels it's complicated. The expose of all this is the chance to notice we have a lot of thoughts that probably aren't true. And wherever there's conflict and wherever they're not productive, that's probably the case, because there's no wise, inspired thought that isn't productive. Doesn't mean it's producing cash and money, but there's value being produced that is not worthless and loathsome and low in self-esteem and low in self-worth and all of those other things that we assign to a self that has no worth whatsoever. Based in fear, based in a lie, based in loathsome scarcity and all those things to give it credence for even existing, which is a pretty insane way to try to prove that reality is something that has so much pain and so much conflict and all that, because we can feel it so fully. The feeling is telling us something's wrong. It's not telling us now you've created reality. It's saying you've created a mess and you're feeling the mess. Oy vey. You want to call it a day?
What? Never.
Since it is a day?
It is a day, yeah. It's a good day.
Yeah. My sense is, Jackie, people, impulsiveness is an implosion. We're sort of imploding inside, and the impulsion is trying to get out of that implosion. It's trying to reverse it, right? And we're seeing a lot of those explosions in the world, people just acting out in very violent, explosive manners. And my sense is it is a form of awareness that we know something's wrong and we just don't seem to know what it is. And so we're
Right.
acting in ways that seem to make sense when in fact they just perpetuate the nonsense.
Right.
And I mean that at every level. If something's true, it would apply to all the different levels and all the variations and all the things that we think are distinct enough to be distinguished, when in fact the distinctions, to make believe that a distinction separates something from the whole, means that it's not distinguished at all. Means that it's just an insane idea that something that is absolute and seamless, meaning has no connecting points, it's just absolute in every way, wouldn't be possible in that other divisiveness in thought. Excuse me. So think about these things. My experience has been that walking away and noticing this in the midst, since so much of our time is spent thinking to our thinking or of our thinking, which we can call ourself, but it isn't. As these thoughts, as these ideas are looked at, if you are looking at the spirit of what's happening and starting to look in that regard, Gabe, to the point of, what are we doing when we look at things that seem to change when we look at them and don't seem to be there until we look for them? That's a great example of problems. The problems don't seem to be there until we start looking for them. And when we're looking for trouble, we find it.
Or create it.
Well, that's the point. We're manifesting it to confirm that the looking is value. But if in that process, considering principles as something that doesn't change and starting to notice that if that in fact is the case, considering it while you're doing what you normally might be doing, in the midst of it, you'll start to see that you can't fight your way out of that thinking, and you can't deny your way out of it, because that's what the whole thing is based in, is denial and defiance and defense. A lie is based in all those things. It's only maintained on the basis of those things. It only exists filled with fear and loathsome and low self-esteem. Even to give it low self-esteem would be to give it some self-esteem. It doesn't have it. There's no esteem in it whatsoever. Non-existence isn't existence. Fantasy will never be reality. That's why it's fantasy. Imagination will never be reality. That's why it's imagined. We can transform things to do what we imagine they can do, but it isn't our doing of them that transform them. It's the possibility that always existed that allows us to do that. To fly, to parachute, to do anything that seems impossible when it becomes possible. It was never impossible, but to the seeming thought that it was impossible. So all things possible are possible. And to consider this in the time that you might otherwise spend thinking about your worry and thinking about your problems and thinking about resentments or any kind of interbulation that you're witnessing inside, is to start to propose to your thinking, there may be more than you've been thinking all along, and that more has always been with you the entire time. And it's only more to the degree that it begins to reveal the limited ideas of the thoughts that we've been maintaining as though they are reality. It isn't more in reality because it isn't a spatial dimensional field, whatever it is. It's just an absolute. If it doesn't have a beginning and it doesn't have an end, it's just thinking of that alone will stop you thinking about a lot of other little worries, or force you to think about those little worries for fear of trying to figure that out and think that somehow it becomes ominous, when in fact it's the nature of the thinking about the small things, the microscopic fixation we have on those tiny little things, that's really the problem. And traumatic. Wouldn't traumatize us if we didn't know better. We wouldn't feel depressed if we didn't know better. We wouldn't feel wrong if we didn't know right. It would be the only thing we could do. And as a result, we would revel in it, celebrate in it. We would actually have a party we would celebrate in a party that would actually be worth having, rather than trying to use a party as an excuse to feel better about something that isn't worth anything. And that's a lot.
Let's have
lot
that
of what addiction
party.
is.
Let's have that party.
We are.
Oh yeah. Every hour is happy hour.
Seeing things accurately is to admit the disturbance in them, to admit if I see my own experience clearly and find the disturbances as something I'm doing, I don't need to understand them. I don't need to know how it started, why it started, when it started, who it started with, what they did. None of that. Any more than I need to know that something in the universe that's doing what it's doing needs to be understood by me before I allow it to do what it's doing, because it's happening right now. And there are trillions of things out there. There are numbers of things there are no numbers to even assign to, that are doing what they're doing right now perfectly without our consideration of them, understanding of them whatsoever. If that's the case, and it's our case, and nature is natural, nature is our nature, period. And to operate on any other basis is certainly a possibility of thought, but none of those thoughts that are wrong will ever be right. None of those thoughts that we think are right that are wrong will ever be right. The inherent conflict in it is easy to notice when we begin to look at what we're doing as something we're causing, rather than something happening to us that we have nothing to do with and can't do anything about. And you don't have to swallow this hook, line, and sinker. You can simply imagine. See, now you can use imagination for its purpose. Imagine it's true. Consider it's true. Don't have to agree with it. Don't have to have hope in it. Don't have to have faith in it, belief in it. None of it. Just imagine. Maybe it's true. Possibly. If all possibility is possible, certainly it's possible to imagine possibility is possible. And when I'm not asking my brain to do the wrong thing as the right thing, I'm not tasking it with an impossible job and thus experiencing impossibility. I will start to experience wonder and wander in the wonder, which is effectively awe. The beginning of saying, wow, what have I made out of this to seemingly miss this while it's been there regardless of what I made? It's not been there, it's been here. There is no there, literally. If that's our nature, there's no words that's ever going to define it, and there's no words that are ever going to take it apart through the lack of definition of it. There's nothing we need to do about it at all. It's essential. It's just the nature of nature. And if the nature of nature is natural, it's our nature, period. Starting from there is very different than thinking we need to get there when we have never been able to do that yet. And most people promise great results if you just pay them monthly to get them. This is free because it is not bound. It's available because there is no shortage of it whatsoever, and it is nothing other than a benevolent, loving, supportive, generous, absolute state of being. Our disruptions have been all along admitting the clarity we have to notice the disruptions as distinguishable events. Again, when I think I'm creating reality, I'm simultaneously thinking there is no other reality. When I begin to look at what I'm doing, I begin to also admit the thing I'm doing actually confirms the knowing nature rather than dismisses it. Only when I think I'm in my thoughts, because I think I am my thoughts, because I think I've created reality with my thoughts, do I think I'm stuck without any perspective whatsoever and can only do what I'm doing the way I'm doing it with no further options. I'm never in my thoughts. I'm always having my thoughts. To think I'm in them is to think they're reality, and that is a choice I make in my thinking process, not in reality. So contemplation, consideration is a contemplated meditation, an awakened meditation. Considering things isn't agreeing with them or having faith in them or believing in them or hoping in them. It's just considering them. And if all possibility is possible, it's worth considering because it will start to dispel rumors very quickly of the seeming impossibility being the only possibility. The freedom allows us to create impossibilities in our thinking, but it doesn't allow us to perfect those impossibilities or they wouldn't be impossible. We're never going to make them into reality because there is no impossibility in reality, only in the ability to think of it in that way. Reality would have to not be real for impossibility to be possible. And again, it strikes right back to this whole context of thinking we create reality and end up now denying reality. Miss the fact that we think we're denying reality and that the deniability is even possible. If something's absolute, I can't make a dent in it. I can't observe it in a way that has any impact on it, but it dramatically impacts my mentality to think in those terms. So consider this during the week, in between. I'm always available, as you guys know, if you want to talk about this further in specific direction for anything you're dealing with. But if you as you begin to see this, the principled nature of this, you're going to see that the answer is always the exact same thing. Whatever we're creating that's out of order is going to seem like disorder happening to us. And to start noticing the effects is to start actually accounting for what we're doing as the cause of those effects. rather than running from them and disagreeing with them, begin to notice the effects are actually telling us exactly what we're doing in thought, not in ourself, not with ourself, not who we are. It's telling us accurately. Our body language is giving us accurate feedback of what we're doing mentally. To admit things as they are is to be fully free from any implications, any impositions, etc. Because they are as they are, regardless of what we think. So the how and the what we think is what the culprit is in terms of the thinking reality. How reality is reality, or how we think is reality, and what we think then becomes true. Peace
Thanks,
is
Jack.
with you.
Thank you, Jack.
You're welcome. It's good to see Jackie, Jana.
Jackie,
Yeah,
Dave.
thanks.
Love you, Jenna.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.